Welcome back, everyone, to Spirit Rescue Talk. I'm your host, Amy Major, and you know my co-host, Jordan Start. As you can tell, we have an amazing guest with us today. We are so excited that he actually said yes, that he's willing to come on and talk to us crazies over here at Spirit Rescue Talk. We have Loyd Auerback coming on the show today to talk about his amazing career working as a parapsychologist in the paranormal field. But he's done so much more than that in just the last few years, not to mention the amazing amount of books that he's written, the shows that he's been on as a specialist, and all the wealth of knowledge that he's been able to provide everyone out there in the world. We are just so lucky and so blessed to have him on the show today. So sit back, grab your popcorn. You're really going to enjoy the show today. So thank you, Loyd, for coming on. We really appreciate coming.
You're very welcome. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I know that so many people know about you in the parapsychology world and the paranormal world. I've been in the spiritualist community. I've been a spiritualist for 25 years. I've been in the spiritual community and as a metaphysician now for 5 years. And it is so expanded. It's expanded so much in I think the last 10 years. We're getting so many people in the paranormal, in the spiritual. We have so many people waking up, which is why we really wanted to be able to do this show, to give out our opinions, our knowledge, information. And I was hoping you could give everyone just a quick background on your story. We did do some research on your growing up and getting involved in paranormal research. Can you tell our guests a little bit about that?
Well, I've really been interested in psychic functioning, psychic phenomena, ghosts, and all sorts of stuff since I was a little kid. I kind of credit the TV world. My father worked for NBC. I had a TV in my room when I was 2. So I was influenced heavily by pop culture in many respects. Science fiction, comic books, which I still read all of those things. And really, it was Dark Shadows, the TV show Dark Shadows,
Right.
which apparently is going to be coming back as an animated series, which is interesting in itself. They just made that announcement recently. That got me to go to the library to look for books on parapsychology because of many of the things they discussed. And I was about 12 years old and found these great science books, because I was a little science geek, and found science books by people, luminaries in the field, J.B. Rhine, J.G. Pratt, Bill Roll, people like that, who'd been around for quite a while. And I was fortunate in high school to have a couple of teachers who encouraged us. In fact, I had a parapsychology club that we started, and we did some research, some experiments, no ghost hunting, although we did go to a spiritualist church a few times in the area, in the New York, Connecticut area. And that's just pushed me further and further. And I lucked out with a graduate parapsychology program, accredited one, when I was of the right age. So right after college. So I've been in the field actually directly since I started grad school, which was over 45 years ago.
Wow. Must be something that you absolutely love. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stuck with it for so long.
Well, the thing about reading science fiction and comic books is that you really start looking at the idea that human beings can be more than what science tells us, more than what, the mainstream tells us, even more than what folklore tells us in many respects. And just all of the stuff that we study in parapsychology is kind of out of comic books and science fiction in some respects. In fact, people ask me about favorite movies and things like that, or TV shows that really display any of this. And honestly, the times that you see psychic functioning in general displayed correctly or close to correctly, although it's exaggerated, it's going to be science fiction films or science fiction TV series. I mean, Star Trek, Star Wars, all over that, right? With ghost stuff, I stay away from horror films because there's no need. I mean, there's a majority of movies with ghosts they're comedies, like the TV show Ghosts on CBS. They've always been comedies. They've been dramas since the very beginning of sound movies. So that's the stuff that influenced me, and it really indicated to me that human beings have a lot that we have to learn, and I want to see us get there. So we're working on mysteries.
say that because I've met a lot of people who didn't know they were mediums, who didn't know that they could engage in psychic abilities, but they started questioning it through science fiction, through comic books, for exactly the reason that you said. It's the idea that people can be and do so much more than what we're conditioned to think, how we're so limited.
Yes. Yeah.
The ones you mentioned are, funny enough, the ones that kind of sparked their interest a little bit more.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people who got interested in psychic functioning and spirituality and other things because of Star Wars, because of the whole Jedi thing. But Star Trek really did a lot too, and there have been other shows and movies that kind of tweaked people's interest in a lot of different ways.
Well, I find that it's a great catalyst to get people to understand more about their own consciousness, their own psychic ability, because you start talking about the force. What is the force? Force is an energetic consciousness that you connect in with, where you're able to understand more about your connection to that energy and what you can do to amplify or enhance that energy within yourself, what we call the light, or any type of higher consciousness. So I think those movies and those stories were a great segue into people learning more about psychic ability and spirituality in general. I don't think it was enough to get people into like meditation and yoga and understanding more about being a vegetarian.
Well, they never really went into the training for Jedi, so I think that that's part of the problem.
That is the problem. I wanted more on that.
Yeah.
So I think understanding that psychic ability is an actual ability that anyone has. Do you still face skepticism with a lot of critics out there about psychic ability and your research on psychic phenomena?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, our society looks at it in general, mainstream science looks at psychic experiences, whether it's extrasensory perception, certainly psychokinesis, mind over matter stuff, and anything related to consciousness surviving death, with either disdain because it doesn't fit, they think it doesn't fit, or there's a bit of fear that actually has been identified in many of them. Interestingly enough, some of the people who call themselves skeptics have expressed their fear if people really were psychic, and their fear is a fear of privacy. That some people, all of a sudden, people are going to be able to read my mind. It's like, that's not how it works.
No.
But it is something that we do get a lot of pushback. And the organized skeptics, there have been several skeptics organizations around. There still is one that's there. And they have their publication, The Skeptical Inquirer, which is a magazine you can find at Barnes & Noble and places like that. They are disbelievers. They are not, for the most part. I mean, there are good skeptics there too, but for the most part, they are what one of my colleagues years ago, who was a skeptic, called pseudo-skeptics. In other words, they're fake skeptics. Because skepticism means doubt. It does not mean disbelief.
Right.
And we do run into the disbelievers. They are often, in general, they're unwilling to actually even look at the evidence or research at all. And they make a big deal about everything being subjective. And that is true. But so is psychology in general, is based on subjectivity. Any research on emotions based on subjectivity. There's sociology, anthropology. There may be objective stuff you observe, but you're subjectively interpreting things. So there's nothing you can do that's not subjective in some way. So there's a lot of false belief and false stuff that's based on nothing. Partly, again, because they don't want to, as they often say, waste my time reading research reports for something I know is impossible.
Wow. What do you think, Jordan, on that one?
Well, I'm just thinking, so you don't know this about me, Loyd, but so in my, my day job, I'm a clinical counselor. And so what I love what you meant about like the skeptics versus the disbeliever, right? Because I even think about psychology and all those things. There is a lot of the relationship to an experience is subjective in many, many different ways, and being able to unpack that, question the questioning, like it's a lot of, breaking it apart a little bit. And I don't think that necessarily always gets as much weight added to it especially with consciousness, right? I think about just how everything that we know today came from not knowing anything at some point. And the pursuit of knowledge, but also that skepticism versus disbelief, right? Because we're not going to know everything. We can't.
Right. And there's a piece of this that there have been studies. This speaks to not only science but politics and religion and other things. That there are people who absolutely positively have to have definitive answers.
Right.
Uncertainty bothers them.
Yes.
And the people who uncertainty doesn't bother, if they're interested in the subject, are people like me who go try to figure out what might really be here and what the possibilities actually are. But I talk to, you talk to many people who absolutely need to know the answer. And there was an article in the Skeptical Inquirer that another skeptic took issue with, because the two guys, psychologists, who were writing this article about why ESP violates the laws of physics. They're psychologists. They weren't physicists who were doing this. And they start out by saying, we didn't look at the data because why would we? It's impossible. And here's why it's impossible. And so another skeptic on his blog actually said, well, actually, I don't believe in ESP, but it doesn't violate the laws of physics, the major laws of physics. So, and he explained why it didn't violate. So people have their dogmatic knowledge and sometimes don't ever look outside that worldview that they've got. And that happens in physics, it happens in psychology, it happens, especially if they're looking outside their own field. They have biases and disbeliefs and such. Yeah.
You got it right there. Biases and judgments, disbelief, between wanting to stay in their own lane due to fear of expansion beyond, because what if they're wrong? That's a lot of fear.
But that's how science progresses. It's you find out you're wrong, or you find out there's something else that you forgot to include, or that there's some other way of looking at something. I mean, that is the progress of science in general.
It's the joy of discovery.
Yeah, right? That's right. That's right. Yeah.
One thing I used to always say, even in my clinical work, is like, I'm so excited when I'm wrong or when I don't get the answer right, because it means I get to learn more. Right.
I think it's a good attitude. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now, I saw that you're a mentalist as well.
Yeah.
And in my experience, I've always known mentalists to be those that try to debunk psychic abilities in a way in the past.
There have been many loudmouth, I'll just call them that, loudmouth magicians and mentalists who kind of jump on that bandwagon. Probably the one who was not a mentalist, he was a magician, the amazing Randy, was one of the loudest. And again, they don't look at the evidence. They don't look at the research that's been done, the controlled research that's been done. They are coming at it from, hey, I can duplicate this, so it must not exist, which is frankly a ridiculous attitude, given that Hollywood can pretty much duplicate anything, right? And now AI can duplicate anything. So that doesn't mean that anything doesn't exist. It just means, I just saw the Supergirl movie, and almost all the effects were apparently practical effects, very little CGI. So they're doing that without computers for the most part. And they've been doing that in Hollywood for decades. That doesn't mean that an explosion doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that the things that were happening don't exist. Some of them, if they're science fiction, they don't exist as of yet, or we haven't seen them. But that's an attitude that is just a way of them talking and getting publicity.
Good to know.
There's a big piece of that. And a lot of that, was started with Houdini going after spiritualists. But many people don't know, people in magic world know, when his mother died, he was seeking out mediums over and over again because he wanted to talk to his mother.
Right.
He wanted that to know if she was okay. And unfortunately, the majority of the people he ran into, there were a couple that he ran into that very well may have been genuine mediums, but he was already jaded by then. And so many mediums were trying to get his seal of approval so that they could, be famous in that way. And he just got mad. And I kind of don't blame him, because they were in fact feeding off his grief, those particular mediums, for the most part, not all of them.
Wow.
And
Well, I'm a big fan of not just being the medium, but teaching my clients how to connect to spirit themselves so they don't have
yes.
to come through a medium.
Yeah, and I hear that from the Forever Family Foundation mediums all the time,
Right.
and even people like Uri Geller, who is kind of a mixed person. He some psychic stuff, some not.
Mm-hmm.
um, Uri's because I knew Uri a bit years ago, and one of the things that's really clear about him, he was a motivational speaker, bar none, and he always, even when he was doing his stuff for television for huge audiences, he would always say, "You can do it. Go
Mm-hmm.
get some silverware from your drawer while you're watching me on TV. You can do it. Everybody can do this." And I think that's very empowering, and should be something that causes people to say, well, wait a minute, he's not all bad, that kind of thing.
It's great.
Speaking of the Forever Family Foundation, I have to say, when I was doing the research on it, I was like, wow, this is an amazing organization.
Yeah, it is.
And I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't seen anything quite like it, where it's this beautiful mix of an intersection between grief, spirituality, and scientific inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at all the different supports, that whether it be through the podcast, right, Science of Life Radio, and like how you guys do that every week, or the mediumship, or like looking into the science of the afterlife and evidence, and how we can, through evidence, we show that there is a continuation of life after a physical passing. And just again, like the grief and loss resources. And I have to say, like, I was very impressed, because I think about even some of my clinical clients, and I'm like, I would like love for them to reach out, because there's so many people that need that support,
Yeah, agreed.
that service. And so I'm curious, as understandings about consciousness has grown and expanded over time, has there been any shifts in how the foundation has evolved in its mission over the years?
Well, I think one of the biggest shifts years ago, which is probably about 10 years, I think, at this point, I'm trying to remember when the first one we did, was shifting away from bigger conferences we did. In fact, coming up this October is the first bigger conference we've done for many years. For the most part, it's been focused on our grief retreats.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a natural evolution of the organization in general. I've been president for over 10 years now. They keep voting me in. It's never unanimous, because I always vote against myself, but still let it happen. And it was started because a couple, Bob and Fran Ginsberg, lost their daughter in a terrible car crash, and their son had also got injured too, but he's fine. One of their neighbors was seeing a medium for her own reasons, and it turned out that Bailey, Bob and Fran's daughter, came through that medium spontaneously during that session with a message for Bob and Fran.
Right.
So this was passed along to them. Fran immediately jumped on it, because this is not too long after Bailey died. They were very much still in grief. Bob was a total skeptic, didn't really buy any of it, but he was going to give it a chance, because he saw that there was something valuable as far as grief relief, at least for Fran, if not for him. But as he saw that medium and was getting direct information and evidence from her that he could not explain any other way, it clearly indicated, told him and Fran, that this was an incredibly healing experience for them. And through that medium, contacted other couples who had lost children. It was more about adults who had lost their kids, and they started this foundation. But because Bob was so insistent about evidence, he arranged for some researchers to be involved, and they were planning on doing a certification process, which was a scientific testing protocol, and had some folks create that for them. And that's where we are today also with this, although we can do it virtually now instead of in person. So that's been another natural evolution since really just after the pandemic that's happened. So it's a process for mediums, and all the mediums are asked to learn something about grief counseling. All the mediums are, before they even are certified, even if they pass the test, which is only about 10% of the folks who try it. People can take it more than once. it's they're asked to do an interview with some of the other mediums. There's ethics come up on that. There's a lot of things that come up in this process. And the grief retreat started a number of years ago as the natural outgrowth with a grief counselor or therapist who's been involved. There are presentations on the scientific evidence as well. And then there are sessions with the mediums. So it's just a process that tries to hit from all directions as much as possible. And we're going to touch a little bit on that in our conference coming up in October, but that's kind of really for people who think they're mediums or want to develop as mediums. And then we have a second track. We're going to have two tracks. One's a little bit more on psychic development and a little bit more fun than just straight education.
Now I'm doing the certification program of mediumship through the NSAC, National Spiritualist Association of Churches for Spiritualism. And through spiritualism, we have to do studies of at least 22 lessons to learn about mediumship, learn about spiritualism. Then we have to sit in front of a board and receive accreditation through them to see if we can actually validate the existence of life after death. We also have to get affidavits from a certain amount of individuals as well. And this is something that's throughout the whole country through the spiritualist churches.
Sure.
What would you say would be a big difference between the spiritualist church certification and Forever Family Foundation? Do you see a big difference in that?
Well, yeah, there is. First, it's not suggested that people who think they're mediums, we're not giving lessons. We're getting people who come to us who already believe that they can do evidential mediumship. So that's number one. We have people, and we have a pool of people who are trained as sitters to not, to not give feedback, to not give things away in other ways. And some often it's not only video, it's often on the phone, because that way you don't have any visual feedback either. There's a grading process for the actual reading that's done to look for specific statements that are there. So it's really based on a protocol that was developed years ago for testing mediums in a controlled environment for scientific purposes in general. And if they don't score there's even a point where we have independent judges that will look at transcripts of their reading and then transcripts of someone else and pull out all the general stuff and see whether or not the sitters have to do this. They have to go through the transcripts and rate all the statements as highly evidential, highly specific, not so in that way. And then there's also this interview process that happens with at least one of our mediumship board, because we have some of the very experienced mediums who interview them extensively. And then there's some other interviews that they have to go through as well. So it is a process. Like I said, not everybody passes. In fact, it is only about 10% who pass the testing process itself. I know of one of our mediums who took it 3 times, I think, before she passed. People have off days. So that's one of the things we absolutely understand.
Right.
And just because you didn't do well one day doesn't mean you can't come back another time and try again when you're feeling better about it.
Wow.
That is one thing I saw when I was kind of looking into you guys. One thing that I kept seeing coming up is that the foundation is really known for its certification programs for mediums. And as you're explaining, and I can see why. And again, as somebody who works in the clinical field, but also is a medium and does these types of things, one thing I oftentimes think about is the ethical standards for protection for the sitter, right? You're working with, in this case, you're working with people that are grieving. They're what in my field would be considered a vulnerable population. And so I'm curious, as somebody who, works in many different areas of the spiritual community, as I get really dark, what ethical standards that you believe every medium or paranormal practitioner should uphold when working with somebody who is grieving?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important. This is one of the things that our mediums also kind of harp on, partly because of our training, that they should be working with a therapist also. That's part of it. That's one of the reasons why we have a grief counselor, grief therapist, do major presentations during these grief retreats. Secondly, there's often an emphasis on how infrequently you should seek out a medium, not how frequently.
Right.
I think that the statement which I hear from those pseudo skeptics is, all mediums are phony. They're all, grief vampires and all that. Well, yeah, there are those people, but you know what? So are some. My wife's a therapist. She's not a grief therapist, but there are people in the psychology field. There are lawyers who are grief vampires. There are
Yes.
business people who are grief vampires. This is not just related to mediumship, but there were so many phonies in the later 19th, early 20th century. So many that were doing that. Going to rich people and connecting with each other and just passing information along. There was that whole segment of fraud that was happening. And again, this comes from the Houdini era. So that's where they're getting it from. They're not looking into what mediumship actually is, who's doing it, the intention behind most of the folks who are doing it either. They're just making stereotypical assumptions right off the bat.
Right. And I know it's difficult to be able to provide all the proof that some people have, because when we have the TV shows and they're heavily edited and they're showing evidence after evidence after evidence, and you have some mediums that have evidence and then they kind of get into an emotional, like they're emotionally connecting to the spirit, and then they get into more evidence. Not all mediums are pure evidence-based. Some of them are more message-based with some evidence trickled into it. I know a lot of mediums have problems with that. But we're also getting into different forms of mediumship these days. We're getting into channeled mediumship, interdimensional mediumship, starseed mediumship. Have you guys started looking into other forms of mediumship that not just prove evidence, but prove in a higher consciousness?
Well, honestly, the foundation only looks for, the mediumship that happens is with deceased people who are connected to the sitters and people like that. That's it. In parapsychology, we've looked at channeling for a time in general, and we really do not see any of that as necessarily evidence of psychic ability, only because we can't prove it. And when I say prove it, you can't ask a channeled entity from another dimension for an ID.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't know who that is. And, the joke always was for some of us back in the 80s was, how do I know it's not Fred, the vacuum cleaner salesman from the 1940s? And he's pretending to be this alien from the Pleiades, because otherwise, who's going to listen to Fred, the vacuum cleaner salesman for that? So we can't go that route. It separates, it goes into a different, potentially useful application for people, but not for science in that sense.
Right. There are some things that science can't prove, though.
Absolutely. No question. That's right. It just, it's like we don't get into UFO stuff either.
Yeah.
It's just, people have asked me if Bigfoot's psychic, and I said, well, bring me a Bigfoot and we'll test him. We can see if they're psychic. First, you got to find Bigfoot. Then we can find out if they're psychic or not.
Yeah, very much so.
Now, as somebody who does connect with things that, again, wouldn't be testifiable at this period of time in our human evolution, I do have to say I really appreciate the grounded approach, because I also think, again, my clinical work, like people do struggle with mental health, people struggle with psychosis, grief, and all the things. Like there's so many things that can kind of lead people down a path that might not be in their best interest, because there's hope and there's desire.
Yeah.
So, but at the same, again, as somebody who does connect to those things that just right now in our period of history aren't necessarily as testable with the technology and the skills that we have right now, maybe one day down the road, but right now we're just not quite there yet, which is okay, because there's also a lot of things that we can test too, that I think gives the foundation in the foreground for the future, right? As we said, it's the joy of discovery. It's the evolution of the science.
It's really the big question in science right now. It's like a major question across all fields of science, is what David Chalmers called the hard question, which is, what is consciousness? We don't even have an agreed upon definition within a single field, let alone a definition. And the consciousness is experienced subjectively. So we don't have any objective way of measuring consciousness. We can only look at the brain, which is only considered consciousness related if you are a materialist, which many of us are not in parapsychology. There's more than that going on. And there have been brain studies actually looking at mediums. So one of the things that it's great about a lot of mediums, that certainly our mediums and others, is they volunteer for research, because they want to know. They want to know, is there something going on in my brain? Is something different happening? And they really want to know that. And I have to say, I've met a lot of psychics who don't do mediumship who have no interest in that sort of thing. So there have been brain studies, both with EEG and with functional MRI, and there are different brain states happening for sure in real mediums. I mean, that's the thing that I throw back in the face of these skeptics who say mediumship's all phony. It's like, I can show you that they don't know it's phony. They're not faking it, at least not consciously, because their brains are working differently when they're communicating with spirit versus just having a conversation with somebody. So that's an important development in science. I mean, that shows us something about consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
But are these skeptics more skeptical about mediumship in general, meaning we're not able to connect to the other side, or are they skeptical that we as mediums are actually able to do it? I mean, where's the skepticism based out of?
The skepticism is that there is another side, the other side. So they don't even accept that there's a life after death to connect with.
Wow.
And then in that instance, and that's not all of them, there's an exception to some of them, and I'll mention that in a second. But what that means is, as far as they're concerned, all mediums are faking it. Because there's not another side to talk to, right?
Yeah.
And there are techniques called cold reading and some other techniques in mentalism that psychics and mediums can use to convince somebody that they really are doing something like that. There is a small set of people who are more materialist oriented, who certainly do research on ESP, other psychic functioning in general. They don't believe in an afterlife. We have people in our field who do not believe in an afterlife, but they do believe that the information that is coming through a medium, a psychic, especially with mediums, we're talking about them now, is because they are psychically picking up information, and without realizing it, they're putting it together in a communication process.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's not fraud. That just means that from their perspective, it can still be grief relieving and all of that. It's just that it's not really a spirit in that sense.
What do you think, Jordan?
No, and I mean, I think there's something that I've talked about before on the show, and I think about this even in the clinical work, that sometimes where we're kind of at in our development or understanding is exactly where we need to be. There are certain things that I never would have believed in that 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line. I'm like, oh yeah, my perspective on that has changed because it's been challenged over time. I've had new life experiences. I've had new growth. Right. And so when I think about, where people are kind of situated at the time, I always think, well, maybe this is where they need to be right now for the collective, for their own mental and emotional well-being. Again, there's a lot of fear that oftentimes comes in this work. But also people don't put your future beliefs on how you feel today, because you could change.
No, absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah.
And I asked the question, what if we move away from the idea of mediums altogether? What if we eventually evolve our consciousness and society for everyone learning how to meditate, raise their vibration, understand that they are a soul living in a physical experience, connect to their guides, their angels, the other side, and make it a part of their daily living? That way it becomes a personal experience to them, because spirituality is personal. Consciousness is personal. It is a collective, but it's all focused on an individual identity through the scope of their perception. So it can't be measured, not on a collective, not in a group. It is individual. So if people have so much skepticism on mediumship, maybe we should start changing the focus on individuals finding it out on their own and having their own personal experience.
Well, I mean, we love to hear that people are having their own experiences, and there's different altered states that bring people to those different experiences in general. That kind of approach, though, means changing society. And I would love to see a major shift in society. There already is a shift to people looking more into the idea of consciousness and whether it's just the body, just the brain. More and more people, even from people in the physical sciences, are coming to the idea, well, wait a minute, the brain does not explain all this stuff.
No.
The nervous system does not explain all this stuff. I mean, right off the bat, now that we know that the nervous system, the brain is not the only seat of information gathering. The gut is the second largest collection of nerve ganglia, and the heart has nerve ganglia on it. Things that we've known for years. We know things that we didn't know 50 years ago, like the pineal gland the third eye regulates serotonin and melatonin in the body, and it reacts to the Earth's magnetic field changes,
Right.
which themselves affect psychic performance and connection and things like that. So there's a lot we're learning about this interface that we have between consciousness and the physical world. And until it's really looked at from a perspective that there is information gathering beyond the normal senses, the physical body, it makes it very difficult to convince people. I mean, I've taught psychic development classes. I'm teaching one again in August. And I've worked with other people who teach that. Not everybody can do it. And because belief is a major part of it also. Acceptance, belief, and all that. It's not, you talk to people about meditation. I don't meditate the way other people meditate. I have other ways that I kind of clear my mind and do everything. I've tried meditation. It doesn't do anything for me, honestly. In fact, it bores me. So, and different types of meditation I've tried. But I have meditative practices. So that's something right off the bat. We have to change what the attitude towards meditation is, that it's not just one thing.
Right.
Even two things. And
Many.
Yeah. So you really have to, and it's not just our society. There are other approaches in other societies. I just finished teaching a course on parapsychology and anthropology, looking cross-culturally at psychic experiences, including mediumship and things like that. And we have to really start incorporating and looking at old knowledge, because people had experiences and have stuff to talk about, but they talk about it in indigenous cultures in words that we don't relate to. This is the problem.
Yeah.
So there needs to be that kind of translation matrix that happens for all of us so that we can really bring that in. It's one of the reasons I've been teaching this class and trying to encourage students who are interested in parapsychology to learn more about other cultures and the way they approach these things.
Well, I know in a lot of my education, there's, I cannot pronounce the name of her for the life of me, but she did a speech called The Danger of the Single Story, which takes a look at how through colonization throughout human history, and how, certain types of knowledge were seen as valid while others were dismissed and therefore were oftentimes forgotten. And yet there's so much value in those knowledges that existed. And even look at that as mainstream therapy. Some of the most impactful healing modalities for working with people with trauma is not the mainstream, but it works. There's knowledge there and being able to apply it. But running into the challenge that you said, sometimes there's words and language and not even just the language, but also how people as a collective would view something. Therefore, their understanding, their filter would look at something very differently. One meaning means something very differently from then versus now, and how that can kind of get in the way. But I love the fact of thinking of even considering alternative. Again, some people got offered a seat at the table, other people did not. And it's unfortunate, though.
And we have the problem also with religion being, mainstream religions having very definitive, although not always understood, which is really kind of interesting, that people make assumptions about their own religion and how it's going to treat a certain experience completely. I've had to deal with that a number of times over the years when people had experiences with a ghost and they were afraid, they were Catholic, they were afraid to talk to their priest about it. The priest was cool about it. Like, did you try talking to him? Kind of thing. So really need to kind of cut through that piece of it too. But so much of it is fear-based.
Yes.
Because you're going to go to hell or something like that. So until all of that really, we kind of rise above that. Still, people can still believe whatever they want, but they have to rise above that when they have these experiences that are actually, they're not paranormal. They're completely normal. If we went by the numbers across the world, even just simply in Western culture and the ones that have been reported to my field over the last 140 years, these are perhaps rare in an individual's experience, but they are absolutely normal experiences. There are many other experiences people have that are more paranormal but considered normal than what we have here.
Yeah, my husband says it often because when somebody comes up to me and says, I don't believe in ghosts, and my husband will rebuttal and say, there's more proof that ghosts exist than you exist. Yet here you are, right here.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so it's like just because that individual doesn't believe doesn't mean it's not true. And sometimes people have to have their own personal experiences to get down their guard and finally admit that
Mhm.
it could be possible. And I think it's difficult because, with the rescue mediumship field that we really specialize in, we have a harder time than psychic mediums that are doing evidence because we don't have the opportunities to provide as much evidence other than sensation changes, meaning changes in the environment that
Mhm.
you can gauge on equipment. The homeowners feel an absolute change in the air, whether it was something that they believed happened because we said it did, or if it actually happened because the earthbound spirit did leave the vicinity of that place. We
Right.
can sometimes gather evidence of history that can be validated in history books or doing some research as well. But the majority of the evidence that we collect is more energy based. Do you feel different? Does the energy of the environment feel different? Are you still receiving a lot of the sensations of having a ghost in your space, or has it all dissipated? That's our evidence. Is through the
Well,
proof is in the pudding of what we're doing.
so I've been doing investigations since I got into the field, and for many years, I have been working with psychics and mediums in these investigations. Not all of our cases certainly have spirits present.
Mm,
We have many of the residual haunting situations. We found other ways to deal with those, but um, not all the cases, but in the cases certainly where the spirit just wants to move on. Didn't I find when I hear somebody making a blanket statement like spirits don't know they're dead, ghosts don't know
right,
they're dead. It's like some are in denial that they're dead, but I'm pretty sure they know that they're dead because
right.
nobody can see them and they can walk through walls and things like that. I think, hey, you have to be pretty stupid if you're dead, right? Or psychologically stuck,
Well,
which is
there are
another thing.
some reasons why they would be in that denial or
Right.
in a confused
No,
state.
and psychologically, that makes perfect sense. That there's no question about that. There are those who didn't, we've had cases. I worked with a psychic medium named Annette Martin for many years, and we had cases where the ghost basically said to her and to the witnesses too, "I didn't see the light."
Mhm.
Okay, well, maybe there isn't a light unless you really look for it. So just explained how to let go and move on, and they moved on. And
Right.
then there are cases where they still have work to do. The spirits at the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, and there's dozens of sailors and officers who did not die on the ship, mind you. They died. Many of them died in civilian life. The few that we've identified died in civilian life after the ship was decommissioned. But
Hmm.
they came back to protect the ship, to save the ship. In fact, it was saved from being scrapped, partly by a foundation that got formed. But when the spirits started appearing, that started changing the tone of being there. And so they're there for a reason.
Right.
There are a couple of restaurants where the ghosts just are having a great time, and we're not going to move them on because they're
Right.
not ready to go. So I think it's really the only way to know that if they're gone is you're not being bothered by them anymore.
Right. Exactly.
And that's a perfectly reasonable. I mean, that is evidence. It's subjective evidence, but it's still evidence. I mean, you only had subjective evidence before the psychic or medium got there to verify that there was somebody there. The people themselves only had their subjective experiences. So you change, like you said, change the energy. We sort of do that with residual hauntings,
Mhm.
or you communicate and you try to resolve the situation like you would with any living human being as best you can.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's nothing to be afraid of at all.
No, absolutely not. I get asked about, aren't you ever afraid going into a haunted place? Like, well, if it's an old building, I'm worried about safety for
And
one thing.
spiders.
And then otherwise, I have more concern about living people than I do about dead people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Very
sure.
much so. Wow.
What I love about you, Loyd, is that you seem to have a very grounded approach to recognizing and understanding things that for many people is unexplainable. right? Like even what you were mentioning, like, hey, like this is evidence, even if it's subjective evidence.
Right.
When I think about just science and research and knowledge, we have oftentimes had many discoveries that at one point was considered subjective. And as I was saying earlier, as time has progressed, as our technology, as our knowledge has deepened, we were able to prove otherwise. And
Or come up
so,
with an explanation for. Yeah. I mean, that is the way things work. Yeah. And it's just observations which are themselves subjectively interpreted, right? I mean,
Yes.
even if we take the probably thing that never happened, Newton getting hit on the head with an apple that fell down to
Hmm.
discover gravity or come up with gravity, that probably didn't happen. Newton was actually an occultist, not just a scientist,
Yes, he
natural
was.
science philosopher. And he just recognized something in what his observations were, which were subjective interpretations, that led him down a path to talk about gravity and come up with the laws of physics. So we have to acknowledge that people's subjective experiences are valid for them and may be valid and have application for the physical world, also the world we live in.
Well, we certainly don't want anyone to feel like their personal experiences aren't validated. If it's true to them and real to them, then it is real to them and is something they should value, something they should trust, something that they don't always need to look for evidence outside of them because, like I said, spirituality is an individual journey that a lot of people experience connecting to consciousness, God, whatever they decide to call it. Um, Beings outside of the matrix of the physical reality. However, they get to their way of understanding that they are more than just a physical body living in a physical world is their individual journey and is right
Mm-hmm.
for them. And I think the only way that this world is going to evolve is that everyone feels comfortable expressing their own individual approach to spirituality without that criticism or judgment from other people and having not necessarily a platform to speak from, but just the comfort of knowing they're not going to look at like they're crazy for having those
Right.
experiences.
Right. Well, for having those experiences, for studying this stuff, for doing any of that, I think also one of the great crimes of the modern world is how much or how little emphasis is put on empathy
Right.
in general. I think the movie Disclosure Day, which just came out, that was one of the major lessons apparently humans were supposed to learn for the highest level of development was empathy. And we
Right.
had Elon Musk who said that empathy is worthless, and he made some derogatory comments about being empathic towards
Wow.
other people, which is what we see in politics and government, often in science and other places, is in business certainly. We see that. So that's a piece of our development that is an emotional piece, but we have to be able to acknowledge that even if I don't believe what you say, you're fine saying it. That's the way you interpret the world, and that's the way it works, for that matter. Um, it's just something we have to consider. Again, when I got into anthropology in college, looking at different cultures, especially their beliefs about magic and and the supernatural. That's what I focused on. It's really interesting just how people interpret the exact same thing so differently based on
Right.
their environment, their upbringing, and all sorts of things. And that's a really important consideration in general.
Well, they're supposed to.
Yeah.
That's the viewing. That's their, I always say, their lens that they need to look through in order for them to gather information and learn it and piece it together. I said life is a big puzzle. We're just gathering pieces as we
Yeah.
go. And the pieces are kind of constantly change based on our perspective change throughout life.
I like to say that life is a big game of Jeopardy. The TV show Jeopardy. We're still
Jeopardy.
looking for the right questions to fit the answers.
What is? Ugh.
That's right. Yeah.
Trying to figure
Yeah.
that
Once we
one
have the
out.
questions in mind, we'll be able to figure it out. Yeah.
Well, I know individuals are probably going to want to do some research more on you. And I know
Hmm.
you said you had some classes coming up at the Rhine Institute. Could you tell us a little bit about those classes?
Sure. I'm one of the main instructors for the Rhine Research Center's Education Center, which is just Rhine EDU. So it's RHINE edu.org, or just go to rhine.org and look for the education button. We have 4-week classes coming up in August. We have then 8-week class, 8 and 4-week classes coming up in the fall in October, starting in October. I'll be teaching 2 classes this summer. One of them is on, it's called Presenting the Paranormal to the Public. We were talking about using the right words and things like that. That's what that class is about. It's how to talk to people without them thinking you're crazy. That's how to be a public speaker talking about this without people thinking you're crazy.
I might need that class.
Yeah, I mean,
A lot of us in the community might need that class.
it's more of a practical approach in general. The other class that I'm teaching is a psychic development class called Developing Intuition, and based on techniques from psychics that I've worked with, but also from parapsychology, from what we've learned about how and why people are more or less psychic and how to make yourself get past the blocks that you might actually have. There's also a class being taught by Robert Wagner, who is an author and expert on lucid dreaming. So there's going to be that class. And then Jimmy Aiken, who's one of our folks, is going to be teaching a course on psi or psychic functioning in Christianity, and how that, because that's one of his religious studies is his background. So that should be an interesting class. Then there'll be other classes in the fall. I am actually teaching a pop culture class in the fall. So if people are into movies and TV and comic books, that's the class for you.
I want to do that.
And we also have an ethics class this fall coming up too. Yeah, so we teach a lot of different classes. I teach field investigations classes. I just finished teaching this parapsychology and anthropology class. I also finished teaching a course on the evidence for survival of bodily death and how to interpret that, and what's better evidence, what's not evidence, what's experiential evidence, things like that. So there we have research classes, all of that through the Ryan Center.
Wow. Wow. Wealth of knowledge right there. And I know a lot of people are going to want to reach out to that and try to get signed up for some of those classes. So we're so happy to support that with you.
That's great. Folks can go to my website, LoydAuerback.com. I haven't put the classes in there yet, but they're going to be up there in the blog. And then also there'll be an announcement, some information about the Forever Family Foundation's mediumship and psychic development convention that's happening in October. So you can also just go to the events page on the foreverfamilyfoundation.org's website for that.
Very good. Very good. Jordan, I'm sure you'll be interested in that.
Oh, there's a few of them, because everything that you're saying, I'm like, yes, that's the stuff I love. Before we let you go, I have one question for you. So after everything you've witnessed out of your extensive career, what do you know today that you of your past would have found the hardest to believe?
Ooh.
Because, we've talked a lot about pursuit of knowledge and how it changes.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Well, I mean, it came into this believing in most, really accepting, looking at the evidence in the scientific side, and also wanting to go towards things. I mean, the one thing that really shifted for me was back in the 80s, a question as to whether or not there really were ghosts, and then having a case where there was literally no other possible explanation for what was happening there. And I've had a lot of experiences along the way that psychokinetic experiences, other psychic experiences myself. So I guess the one real change was quite a while ago, and realizing that I really do have to worry about living people and not so much dead people when I do investigations.
Fair.
Yeah.
There's truth there.
Had a couple of very dicey situations in the 80s, and taught me real fast, don't go alone to something.
Oh.
Safety in the 3D is paramount to doing any this work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go with someone you know, go in with someone you trust, bring a flashlight, and always tell people.
We don't do investigations at night, so I don't worry about that.
I was going to say daytime, safe shoes.
It's not even that. It's like, if you look at all the experiences, the vast majority of people's experiences happen with the lights on, if they're at night at all.
Absolutely.
Or early morning or during the daytime. So why turn the lights out?
Agreed.
There's a reason for that. It's television. It's a TV reason, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. There is a vibrational change when you turn the light out. That I give them, because it does create a denser vibration in the air, which then can bring in more spirits. But I'm not Not
Yeah,
enough.
but
We also
the average
communicate with
person
spirits
never
at any time.
experiences that. That just doesn't happen. So
Yeah.
it,
Well,
it's you know,
a
and then
haunted
the other problem with that is you're talking about that change when you turn the lights out. There's a perceptual change, and it screws with your perceptions.
right.
So your interpretations are going to be way off, even if you did experience a ghost.
Exactly.
Yeah, your nervous system will go up into arms too, just because for safety, right? But that's the thing is, as you know, even me and Amy, when we communicate with spirit, you can do it in the daytime too. So
Yeah, and like the spontaneous experiences that happen to people happen during the daytime, or again when the lights are on. There's no need to investigate something in the dark, unless the
I always
spirit
tell
tells you that they got to turn the lights out.
spirits don't know that it's day or night sometimes.
There you
So
go.
lights-
Yeah,
so you might as well be safe and be able to see where you're stepping, where you're walking.
yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
and
Safety
where the
first.
sound is coming from, and where everybody's placed, all of that. Yeah,
But this
absolutely.
takes away the fun. It takes it away.
Well, you know, there is paranormal tourism, and I think that's fine if you're a thrill seeker. If you're a hobbyist, then you just want to experience something. That's great. Many of us are worried about some of these well-visited places with these ghost hunting groups, that they are leaving a residual imprint behind. So down the road, some other ghost hunter is going to come in, or psychic's going to come in and see a bunch of ghost hunters.
There you go.
Their replay of them doing things, and
Yeah,
that's
Loyd speaks
always
our language.
I was going to say we've talked about this.
yeah, it's a real hit. Actually, it's going to be funny when it happens, I think. But we can all say we told you so.
Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, but yes.
Yeah.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us and your background and the work that you're doing right now. I'm always a huge fan of psychic research. I'm always trying to do a little bit more myself, considered going to a parapsychology degree. Started going into metaphysics, looking to get my doctorate in metaphysics now, just because I do want to understand more about consciousness. Working with earthbound spirits, we start learning about fractal forms of consciousness and residual energy from that fractal forms of consciousness. So that's my huge passion right now. And I'm just so grateful to have you on to share your experience and your knowledge with us. Always trying to learn more, for sure.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And Jordan, I know a lot of our guests are going to have a lot of questions, and how can they reach out to us if they do?
If you guys have any questions or have any commentary, leave a comment below, or you can always email us at thespiritrescuetalk@gmail.com.
It was awesome seeing all of you again. We look forward to seeing you next time.